Welcome to Boulevard's Big Three podcast, where we break down this week's sermon with questions from you and our friend Abby Rosser. Today we continue on the topic of expressing our allegiance to God by trusting and relying on Him.
That's right. As always, if you have a question about the sermon, you can scan the QR code on the screen or go to boulevard.to/askbig3 to submit your question.
Here's the summary from chapter 2, verse 11. In the key verse that you mentioned, we are on our own, one mindset, versus we are not alone, the other mindset.
Got it. Nailed it.
Dude, that was good.
I think it's good.
It's so good.
Yes, so good.
If you want to know more about it, read Daniel 2. But
that's right.
That's really good.
That's right.
That's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get started, so Hunzi, is there anything as you prepare for Daniel chapter 2, and we didn't get to talk to you before you did Daniel chapter 1, anything just preparing for your sermons that just really, like, oh my goodness, I read this story a million times, where did this come from?
Yeah, but only a little bit of speculation. And that is, are we good with that? We're going to speculate for a second.
Yeah.
And that is, I think Nebuchadnezzar knew what the dream meant. I think that's why he was so troubled. The more I kept reading it, I see he's harsh, he's angry, he's violent, he seems desperate, like he's grasping for straws. And I think when Daniel spoke it, it was only confirmation. I don't think it was news to him. I believe he was so stirred up because he had already started to come to grips with the fact there's a rock coming, and I'm not it.
Yeah.
I'm speculating, but his character seems to portray some of that, and of course he acknowledged that Daniel got it right, and I think resonated even with the interpretation of yes, this is correct.
Interesting. Wonder if it changes the way that he ruled. Like if we knew our end was coming, how do we live different?
Well, then there's a lot more of Nebuchadnezzar to come.
Yeah, there is, including the
Crazy
strangest thing in chapter 3 with the erecting of a statue for worship. So, and then at the end of this, he worships Daniel, but not truly his God, not in a proper way. So he almost gets it, and then he completely whiffs in chapter 3. So, but I think he had at least some kind of back knowledge of this is about me, and it isn't a good thing about me, and that would explain probably why he was so troubled. So
he was hoping somebody would come and tell him something different.
Maybe
it
so.
has to do with another nation.
To kind of relieve him. But I believe he was aware that his time was limited.
And maybe the further he got away from it, his dream left him like it does us.
Yeah, that's right.
You wake up and move on.
Yeah.
It is. That is true. A lot of times when you first wake up, you feel very upset about it, and then afterwards you're like, why was I so upset that whatever?
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Right.
Well, now let's dive into those big three questions, Abby.
All right. Okay, so I like to write down 3 things that jumped out at me, and I could have written down a lot more. I actually did write down a lot more. I also drew my own picture. It's better than a traced Hulk Hogan.
This is true.
Well, it depends on how you look at it.
It's really not that great.
No, it's good.
But
it's good.
okay, so my first thing I wrote down was, you said not all distress is from God, but some is. And, Thursday night, were you here for Sissy Golf on Thursday night?
No, I wasn't. I was out of town.
It was so great. And she talked about anxiety and anxious thoughts, and just really good. But so I wondered if you could take a minute and talk about how God uses, I don't know what the best way to say it, kind of a guilty conscience versus, does God ever use shame?
So I use the phrase toxic shame when I speak about the kind of shame that is not of God. When I think about the word shame in its healthiest form, I believe it breeds humility, which is there are some things I can do well, there are some things I cannot do well. But guilt is I screwed up. And guilt can be really deep when you screwed up and you built on a foundation that's in opposition to God. And that's the kind, I think, that he wanted Nebuchadnezzar to experience previously, Pharaoh to experience, and so on. So here's my take on that. God, and I could have said this, God doesn't want you to live in either guilt or shame, as though it's your dwelling. But it is a room I think he wants you to visit as a corrective here and there, just like a good parent will initiate with a child. Not toxic shame, I'm defective, I can't, I'll never be good. But guilt, which is I've done something wrong and I need to make amends. And healthy shame, which is I do some things well and some things I do not do well. I have to stay humble and sympathetic, compassionate towards people. So yes, I think God uses it. I believe guilt can produce godly sorrow, which in turn leads to repentance, as Paul would teach in 1 Corinthians. I think it only becomes a danger when it becomes core to somebody's identity rather than a corrective about an action, about a behavior, not necessarily about the core of you as a person.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love how your mom in that story, how she kind of let you arrive to that place. And then you weren't getting there fast enough, so she prompted you a little bit, but she let you sit in that guilt for a little while. And because I think a lot of times as parents, we try and scoot that out of the way. We don't want them to feel bad feelings. We don't want them to be upset ever, ever, ever. And so sometimes they really do need to sit in their guilt so they can be convicted of it. Could be a gift from God. That distress could come from God.
And I wasn't actually overstating that part of the story. I think about it as a defining moment for me. And the way I see the grace of God most evident in my life is that he doesn't let me get away with things.
Yes.
I mean, he makes it hard for me to sleep. If I'm doing something actively and rebelliously against him and I sleep well, that would be very scary for me, right? But his grace stirs me.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on that. How was the teacher the next day? 'Cause it's beautiful to hear as adults, the conniving that goes on between parents and teachers.
Yeah, there was some messaging happening there.
What was the teacher's reaction the next day?
Well, I came in so repentant, I got a hug. I mean, it was an immediate, a hug, and I said, I have to withdraw from the competition. She said, I know, right? So she was really gentle with me about
She
it.
probably already knew you well enough to know
She knew, I mean,
that
she
this was
understood.
killing you.
I totally botched that one. So,
wow, I
yeah.
love that story.
Yeah.
Okay, the second thing I wrote down was you said not all dreams are sent by God, but some are. And I was just curious, if you don't mind getting personal, have you ever had a dream that you felt was sent by God?
Yeah.
Did it involve Hulk Hogan?
It did not involve Hulk Hogan or Macho Man Randy Savage or The Rock or any of that, unless, of course, you mean Jesus. So I had a dream about one of my children. And I don't want to go into all of the details, but what I'll say is there was a terrifying moment, and then a solution I didn't know existed, and then relief. And it helped inform me and Kristen in a very major way on how to deal with some stuff we were dealing with. So it was a gift on breaking us free from a rut we were in, not seeing the solution, and he gave it to me in the night. So I would love to go into more detail. I'm not trying to be, but to protect my boy, right? To protect the child. But it was like, here's the mess, here's the solution highlighted really clearly, and then here's the relief to follow. And we were able to go with it.
Wow.
So
that's good.
Have you ever had one that you felt like was from God? Put you on the spot. You don't have to say what it is. I'm just curious.
I mean, I'm sure that I have. But I'm not a real vivid dreamer.
Really,
right?
yeah.
It's not it's not a thing that sticks with me. I think there have been moments, not necessarily in dreams, but in those deja vu moments for me. It's more deja vu moments for me where it's like, oh, I've been there, and
it's more of a waking thing.
I knew that was about to happen. There's more of that than the unconscious sleep. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And we're going to have another question about that in a minute, so I don't want to steal any more thunder from another question from a viewer. My third thing I wrote down was you talked about how the statue and the rock that came down that crushed all of it, it to absolutely non-existence.
Yeah, you don't even see a trace of it anymore.
Mm-hmm. But you pointed out, I've never noticed this before, where you said, your phrasing of it was there were no fingerprints on it, but it says specifically it wasn't made by human hands. And also, Daniel's comment to Nebuchadnezzar, I love that, where he was like, can you interpret the dream? And he says no. And it's probably like, seriously? And then he's like, but God can.
Right. Right.
And so why is this posture of humility so important?
Okay. I think it has to deal with why Daniel's in Babylon in the first place. Daniel's in Babylon that God would be glorified in Babylon. So wherever we're positioned in life, if you think about it as my aim is to bring God glory where I am, then the only way he could answer it and accomplish his mission is to say, no, King, I can't do that. But there's a God you need to meet who can. You heard yesterday that they don't interact with us in this, and they would not reveal the mystery. But like Paul would say to Athens, I want to introduce you now to the unknown God. And so if our mentality is, I'm at this place of work to glorify God, I'm at this school to glorify God, I'm here to glorify God, then I think our phraseology changes dramatically in how we do our work and how we take credit for certain things and so on. I mean, it's really quite a powerful thing for it to be a political solution. This isn't the religious world, right? I mean, he's talking to a king, and he develops this political solution to a problem and says, it was God. So to me, that means if you're a businessman, you come up with a solution that helps your company, and you say, it was God.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. If you want to give me a pay raise for that, cool, boss. But in the end, it was God who helped us with that breakthrough. Teachers doing that. I mean, in every field, and I think that's why we're in the fields we're in, so that they can see the wisdom of God is active in the believer. And then when he speaks credit or she speaks credit to God, God's glorified in this discipline or in this field now. And Daniel knew the assignment. That's the short answer is he knew his assignment, which is to give glory to God in Babylon.
He was there for a reason.
He was there for a reason.
It makes you wonder if Nebuchadnezzar had a humbling moment there when Daniel says there is a God, it's not you. There's
Sure,
somebody
yeah.
else. And he was like, wait a minute, everybody thinks around here thinks I'm a God.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
He had to humble
yeah.
himself to at least acknowledge there was something else.
Well, in every international interaction, God confounds the wisdom of the wise. So the plagues with the gods of Egypt, right? Moses is constantly doing that. Joseph is constantly doing that. I mean, he's down in the pit, but they have to go to him. They got to get the man out of the pit because Egypt doesn't have what they need to help with the king's dream, right? Now you're in Babylon, and they've got to go find Daniel, who's supposed to be in training. And the astrologers of the day, they can't figure it out, so they go to him. And he's always confounding national wisdom so that he can put himself above their gods and above their way of thinking.
Yeah.
So,
That's awesome.
but may he be exalted, which means in business, in all of our fields of work, we need to be more regularly saying, that one came from God.
Yeah.
That solution came from God. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I love that.
which means we're not in control.
Yeah.
And we like to
Yes.
control
Praise
things.
Yeah,
God.
We
absolutely.
like to determine the outcome. Well, looks like
Absolutely.
we got a question from the viewer mailbag.
All right.
So let's see, this one's from Brian in Smyrna. Here's the question. How can you tell if a dream is from God or another source? Are there any indicators to look for?
Okay, questions like these, I'm going to just preface. Always end with at least a little bit of disappointment because they can't be answered definitively because God doesn't work by formulas. And so it's like, if there was a particular formula we could walk through, but we don't get that. Sometimes it's literally just the Mexican food you ate the night before. Or it's like your own paranoia about a problem you're trying to solve. I believe that happens a lot. The answer, if there is a quote formula, if there is a strategy, it's what Daniel does with his friends when they call a prayer service, and it's discovered in community. So Daniel gets the dream downloaded in his mind of what Nebuchadnezzar experienced. But I think friendships, spiritual community is really key here. Paul tells us that some will have the gift of interpretation and not all will. And so in close Christian community, we're sharing everything that's going on. Hey, here are my struggles. Here's a dream I had. We're praying about all things. We're submitting everything to the Father, and we're trusting the wider Christian community to speak into that and to say, you might consider this. Or have you thought about it this way in light of what you dreamed the other night? So don't put it all on yourself. Open yourself up to deeper Christian community to say, guys, this seems strange. We've never done this before, but I want to pray about a dream I've had and just see if God reveals anything to some of you in the room.
That's a great starting place.
Great, right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, listen, if you have any more questions about allegiance and the book of Daniel, be sure to send it to us at boulevard.to/askbig3 or by using the QR code.
And if you want to rewatch the sermon or watch it for the first time, you can find it at boulevard.to/sermons.
Well, that wraps up this week's Big Three. Look for this podcast on your favorite platforms and be sure to join us next week for Boulevard's Big Three.
Until then, don't be afraid to ask big questions. You can always look to God for the answers.